You can't do this. I own you. I own this whole community. Her shriek echoed off the clubhouse walls, a sound like tearing metal. It was the last thing she screamed before the cold, final click of handcuffs silenced her tirade. It wasn't true, of course. She didn't own me. In fact, as the whole, stunned neighborhood was just beginning to understand, I owned her. I owned the very ground she was standing on. It all started with a garden. Not a sprawling, ostentatious display, but a small, quiet patch of earth at the edge of my property. It was the last house on the cul-de-sac, pressed right up against the foot of Blackwood Mountain. I had moved there 6 months after my wife, Eleanor, passed away. The quiet was what I craved. The silence of the mountain, the whisper of the pines, a place to heal a wound that felt as vast and empty as the sky above. I was a structural engineer, a man who spent his life with blueprints and load-bearing calculations. I understood stress and tension, the precise point where things break. My own breaking point had come and gone, and this little house was my attempt to rebuild. Eleanor had loved wildflowers. So, I built a small, raised bed from reclaimed railway sleepers, filled it with the best soil I could find, and planted columbines, lupins, and Indian paintbrushes. In the center, I placed a simple, unpolished river stone, smooth to the touch. It wasn't a headstone, just a place to rest my hand and feel close to her. Her ashes were scattered on the mountain slope behind the house, the land I had inherited from my grandfather, a place she had adored on our one visit years ago. The garden was just for me. A quiet memorial. A conversation. That was my first mistake. In the meticulously curated world of the Summit Creek Estates, quiet personal memorials were apparently an act of rebellion. Her name was Brenda, and she moved through the neighborhood with the self-appointed majesty of a feudal lord. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair and a voice that could curdle milk. Her emails, which began arriving 2 days after I finished the garden, were masterpieces of passive-aggressive tyranny. Dear Mr. Miller, the first one began, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that an unapproved landscape modification has been erected on your property. Please refer to Bylaw 17, subsection C, paragraph 4, all permanent and semi-permanent landscape structures, including but not limited to gazebos, retaining walls, and decorative rock formations exceeding 18 inches in height, must be submitted for prior approval. Please submit a formal application at your earliest convenience. I read it and sighed. I was new here. I didn't want trouble. I was a man seeking peace, not a war over a pile of dirt and flowers. So, I dutifully downloaded the 12-page application form, filled it out with the precision of an engineering schematic, and attached a photo of the simple, harmless garden. I dropped it in the HOA mailbox at the clubhouse. I figured that would be the end of it. The denial arrived a week later. It was a single, curt sentence. Application denied. The proposed structure does not align with the community's aesthetic standards. Aesthetic standards? It was a box of wood and flowers. It was less obtrusive than the flock of plastic flamingos flanking Brenda's own meticulously manicured lawn, an exception to the rules she had apparently granted herself. I tried to be reasonable. I called her. Brenda, Jack Miller here from number 12 cul-de-sac, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm just calling about my garden application. I was hoping you could clarify what part of it doesn't meet the aesthetic standards. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The rules are quite clear. We can't have residents just building whatever they want. It creates a chaotic, disorganized look. It lowers property values for everyone. Your thing is an eyesore. It's a memorial for my late wife, I said, the words feeling heavy and private. I hated having to say them to her. There was a pause. For a moment, I thought a sliver of human decency might break through. I was wrong. That's a personal matter, isn't it? She sniffed. This is a community matter. You have 14 days to remove the unapproved structure, or fines will be levied. Have a wonderful day, she hung up. The first fine was $50. Then it became $50 a day. The notices, printed on bright pink paper, were stuck to my front door with aggressive strips of packing tape. I paid the first few, still hoping to de-escalate. I sent a revised application, offering to stain the wood a different color or plant different flowers. It was returned unopened, with "Final Notice" scrawled across the envelope in angry red marker. Brenda escalated. She started posting thinly veiled warnings on the community's social media page. A reminder to all residents, one post read, that adherence to our community bylaws is what keeps Summit Creek a premier living destination. Unapproved structures can be a sign of disrespect for one's neighbors and can negatively impact us all. Let's all do our part. A few of her sycophants would chime in with comments like, "Well said, Brenda," and "Some people just have no consideration." I felt a slow, cold anger beginning to replace my grief-numbed patience. This wasn't about a garden anymore. This was about power. It was a bully's game, and she was enjoying it. I was just a new, quiet widower. An easy target. She had mistaken my desire for peace as a weakness. That was her second mistake. The turning point, the moment the war truly began, came on a Tuesday morning. I had an early site inspection for a bridge project an hour away. I left before sunrise and returned in the mid-afternoon. As I turned onto the cul-de-sac, I saw it. A commercial landscaping truck was parked in front of my house. Two men were in my yard with shovels and a wheelbarrow. They had torn it all apart. The railway sleepers were pried up and tossed aside. The rich soil was shoveled into a messy pile on my lawn. The wildflowers, the columbines and lupins I had chosen so carefully, were ripped out by their roots and lay wilting in the sun. The river stone, my simple, solid connection to Eleanor, was gone. I stopped my car in the middle of the road. A cold, crystalline rage filled me, so pure and so intense it felt like a physical force. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet. It was structural. It was the feeling I got right before solving a complex engineering problem, a sense of absolute, methodical clarity. I got out of the car and walked calmly toward the two men. They stopped working and looked at me, a little wary. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice was unnervingly steady. "HOA hired us," the bigger one said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Said this all had to go. Said it was a code violation. Did they happen to mention this is private property?" He shrugged. "Just doing our job, man. Take it up with the lady in charge." Just then, Brenda's golf cart came zipping around the corner. She pulled up with a triumphant smirk on her face. "Ah, Mr. Miller," she chirped. "I see the beautification project is well underway. It's amazing how much better this looks already, isn't it? So much more clean." I just stared at her. I didn't say a word. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Her smirk faltered for a second. "Well," she huffed, recovering her bluster. "Since you refuse to comply with the bylaws, the HOA had to take action. You'll be billed for the removal service, of course." I looked at the wreckage of my wife's memorial. I looked at this smug, cruel woman in her golf cart. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The peace-seeking man was gone. In his place stood an engineer. And I decided, right then and there, that I was going to dismantle Brenda's entire world, piece by piece, using nothing but the rules she loved so much. And I would do it with the same cold, methodical precision she had used to destroy my garden. "Where is the stone?" I asked, my voice flat. She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that ugly rock. The boys probably hauled it away with the rest of the rubbish. It was a tripping hazard." That was it. That was the precise point of structural failure. She hadn't just destroyed my property. She had thrown away my last physical connection to my wife and called it rubbish. I nodded slowly, my eyes locked on hers. "I see," I said. "Thank you for the clarification, Brenda." I turned and walked back to my car without another word. The look on her face was one of confusion. She had expected a fight, yelling, maybe tears. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. She thought she had won a skirmish over a garden. She didn't realize she had just declared a war against a man who designed bridges for a living, a man who knew exactly how to find and exploit a critical weakness in any structure. And I was going to find hers. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, the faint scent of pine from the mountain drifting through the open window. Grief was a cold, heavy blanket, but now it was joined by something else: purpose. A cold, clear, calculating purpose. Brenda had built her little kingdom on a foundation of bylaws and intimidation. I was going to excavate that foundation until I found the cracks. And I knew exactly where to start digging. My profession had taught me one thing above all else: you don't start building until you've surveyed the land. Every structure, from a skyscraper to a garden shed, relies on the integrity of the ground beneath it. The same is true for legal structures like an HOA. Their authority is built on deeds, titles, and property lines. I fired up my high-powered workstation, the one I used for running complex structural simulations. I pulled up the county's public records portal. For the next several hours, I was in my element. I downloaded every document related to the Summit Creek Estates development, the original plat maps from the 1990s, the full declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS, and the deed for every single lot in the subdivision. I spent hours meticulously cross-referencing, overlaying the digital plat maps with high-resolution satellite imagery. I was looking for a seam, a flaw, a discrepancy. At first, everything seemed airtight. The property lines for each house were clearly defined. The common areas, the clubhouse, the pool, the little green spaces, were all legally deeded to the HOA corporation. It was a well-drafted, legally sound development. Almost. It was around 3 a.m. when I found it. It was a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that anyone else would have missed it. It was an anomaly in the survey lines for the main road, Summit Creek Drive, that snaked its way up from the main highway, through the ostentatious front gate, and into the network of cul-de-sacs. The road itself, the asphalt and the land directly beneath it, wasn't part of the Summit Creek development plat. It was a separate parcel. A long, thin, serpentine strip of land with its own, entirely different parcel number. My heart started beating a little faster. This was interesting. I plugged the new parcel number into the county records search. The result that came back made me sit bolt upright in my chair. The parcel wasn't owned by the county. It wasn't owned by the state. It wasn't owned by the Summit Creek HOA. It was listed as belonging to the Blackwood Mountain Mining and Timber Corporation, a corporation that, according to the state registry, had been defunct since 1958. This was more than interesting. This was a crack in the foundation. A big one. The entire community, every single resident including Queen Brenda herself, was using an access road they didn't own. For decades, they had been trespassing. But the rabbit hole went deeper. What happens to the assets of a defunct corporation? They're either sold off or they pass to the shareholders. I started digging into the history of Blackwood Mining and Timber. It was an old company, founded in the late 1800s. They had owned thousands of acres of the mountain, logging and prospecting for silver before going bust. This is where the story became personal. My grandfather, a shrewd man who had a penchant for buying up odd lots of land, had been an investor. He loved the mountains. He never did anything with the land, he just liked owning a piece of the wilderness. He passed away when I was in college, and his assets, including a portfolio of obscure land holdings, were passed to my father, and then, after my father's death, to me. I went to the old fireproof safe in my closet where I kept important family documents. My hands were trembling slightly as I worked the combination. I found the file I was looking for, a thick manila folder labeled simply Blackwood. Inside were dusty, brittle stock certificates and a stack of original quitclaim deeds from the 1960s. My grandfather had bought out the other remaining shareholders of the defunct corporation for pennies on the dollar, consolidating all of its remaining assets. And there it was, on the last page of the asset ledger, listed next to a dozen other forgotten parcels: Parcel 73-4A, Access Tract, approximate, 147 acres. It included a hand-drawn map. The map showed a long, winding strip of land. It was the road. And attached to that strip of land, like a giant balloon on a string, was a much larger parcel, Parcel 73-4B, Mountain Tract, approximate, 2,400 acres. I sat there, in the pre-dawn stillness of my office, the deeds spread out before me. The scale of it was staggering. I didn't just own the road. I owned the entire mountain that loomed behind the Summit Creek Estates. The mountain where I had scattered Eleanor's ashes. The mountain that served as the pristine, protected backdrop that gave the community its name and a significant portion of its property value. Brenda had picked a fight with me over a few square feet of soil. She had built her entire kingdom, her throne of petty rules and regulations, on my land. The irony was so rich, so profound, it was almost comical. She had no idea. No one did. For 20 years, this entire exclusive, gated community had existed solely at the mercy of a forgotten deed in a dusty file. My deed. A slow smile spread across my face. This was better than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a crack in her foundation. This was a sinkhole. And I was about to watch her, and her whole rotten little empire, get swallowed whole. The engineer in me was already formulating a plan. It would be a project of demolition. A project of reclamation. And it would be a monument to poetic justice. My plan wasn't about quick, angry revenge. That was Brenda's style. Mine would be methodical, patient, and legally unimpeachable. I was going to build a cage for her, and she was going to walk into it herself, convinced it was her own idea. I called the plan Project Legacy. It was for Eleanor. It was for my grandfather. It was for me. The first step was to set the bait. I needed to provoke Brenda into overreaching, into doing something so egregious and so public that she couldn't possibly walk it back. My destroyed garden was a good start, but I needed something bigger. Something that would threaten her sense of absolute control. I spent a day drafting a new submission to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. This time, I wasn't asking for a small garden. I was proposing the construction of a 1,200 square foot hobby workshop at the very back of my property, right up against the official property line separating my lot from the mountain. My lot was one of the largest in the development, and the workshop would comply with every single setback and height restriction listed in the bylaws. I drew up professional-grade blueprints, including detailed elevations and a materials list that was fully compliant with the community's approved aesthetic. It was a perfect application. It was also, to someone like Brenda, a declaration of war. A workshop, a place for noise and work and machinery, in her pristine residential paradise. I knew she would see it as a personal affront. I sent the application via certified mail, return receipt requested. The trap was set. While I waited for the inevitable explosion, I took other steps. I installed a state-of-the-art security system around my property. Not just a simple doorbell camera, but multiple high-definition, night vision-capable cameras covering every angle of my house, my yard, and, most importantly, my driveway and the cul-de-sac in front of it. They recorded 24/7 to a secure cloud server. Documentation is everything. I also found a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shrewd, semi-retired real estate litigator named Arthur Vance. He was a bulldog who had a legendary reputation for eviscerating arrogant developers. I laid out the whole story for him, starting with the garden and ending with the deeds from my grandfather's safe. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Mr. Miller," he said, his eyes twinkling. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. It's a legal masterpiece in the waiting." We spent the next week preparing. Arthur filed the necessary paperwork with the county to have the deeds formally updated and recorded in my name, a quiet administrative move that would go unnoticed by the HOA. We prepared notices of trespass, cease and desist letters, and calculated a bill for 2 decades of unauthorized use of my private road. We were building an arsenal. The certified mail receipt came back signed by Brenda herself. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was her. "A workshop," she shrieked, without even a hello. "Are you insane? This is a residential community, not an industrial park. I am telling you right now, Miller, you will never, ever build that monstrosity here." "Hello, Brenda," I said calmly. "I assume you've received my application. As you'll see, it is fully compliant with all HOA regulations. I don't care if it's compliant. I am the president of this board, and I am vetoing it. It's denied. Do you hear me? Denied." "That's not actually how the bylaws work, Brenda," I said, my voice maddeningly placid. "The committee has to review it and provide a formal, written reason for denial based on a specific violation. A presidential veto isn't part of the process." She made a sound like a strangling cat. You think you're so smart with your little rules. You just watch me. You have no idea who you're dealing with." She slammed the phone down. Perfect. She was enraged, she felt her authority was being challenged, and she was telegraphing her intent to operate outside the rules. She was walking right toward the cage. The official denial letter came a week later. It was a joke. The reason for denial was listed as potential for noise and general disruption to community harmony. It was vague, subjective, and legally unenforceable. It was exactly what Arthur and I had hoped for. I instructed my lawyer to send a simple, polite response. The letter stated that their reason for denial was not based on any specific bylaw, and as such, I considered my application to be approved by default due to their failure to provide a valid objection within the mandated 30-day window. I informed them that I would be breaking ground on the legally approved structure in 2 weeks. I knew this would push her over the edge. And it did. The day before my announced groundbreaking, I came home to find the entire cul-de-sac in a state of chaos. A large cement truck was blocking the road, and a construction crew was hastily assembling wooden forms at the end of my driveway. Brenda was there, of course, directing the work like a battlefield general. I parked at the end of the street and walked up, my phone discreetly recording video from my pocket. "What's all this, Brenda?" I asked, feigning surprise. She spun around, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "This is a community-funded traffic calming measure," she announced, loud enough for all the gawking neighbors to hear. "We've had numerous complaints about excessive speed in this cul-de-sac, so the HOA has authorized the installation of a permanent curb. For safety, you understand." They were building a 6-inch high, 3-foot wide concrete curb directly across the entrance to my driveway. They were literally sealing me onto my property. It was illegal, it was vandalism, and it was breathtakingly stupid. And it was all happening in front of a dozen witnesses. My high-definition cameras were capturing every glorious moment. "You're barricading my driveway," I stated, my voice flat. "It's a traffic calming curb," she repeated, puffing out her chest. "If it happens to inconvenience those who don't respect our community's harmony, well, that's just an unfortunate side effect." She had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. She had trespassed on my property, the end of the driveway apron was still mine, hired a crew to build an illegal structure, and was now publicly admitting to doing it to punish me. It was a gift. I just nodded. "Okay, Brenda," I turned and walked back to my house. Her triumphant laughter followed me. She thought she had won. She thought she had physically blocked my workshop and put me in my place. She was so focused on winning the battle of the driveway that she had no idea I was about to win the war for the entire territory. That evening, with the concrete still curing on the illegal curb that imprisoned my car in my own garage, I made a phone call. "Arthur," I said. "She did it. We've got her. It's time to spring the trap." The first salvo wasn't a lawsuit. It was a letter. A very simple, very direct letter delivered by courier to every single member of the Summit Creek HOA board, with a special, personally addressed copy for Brenda. It wasn't about an illegal curb or a denied workshop. It didn't mention any of it. The letter was from Arthur's law firm. It calmly and formally informed the HOA that for the past 22 years, the association and its residents had been trespassing on a private road, parcel number 73-4A, legally owned by their client, Jack Miller. It included copies of the newly recorded deeds and the official county survey map, highlighting the road in bright yellow. The second page was an invoice. It was a bill for 22 years of unauthorized use, calculated at a very reasonable commercial rate for land access, compounded annually. The total came to just over $14 million. The final paragraph was the real killer. It stated that, effective in 72 hours, all unauthorized access to parcel 73-4A would be denied. A barrier would be erected at the property line near the main highway, and any vehicle or person attempting to use the road would be considered to be trespassing. I sat in my office, imagining the moment Brenda would open that envelope. I pictured the confusion, then the dawning horror, then the inevitable explosion of narcissistic rage. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang about an hour after the courier confirmation came through. The caller ID said, "Brenda." I let it go to voicemail. I wanted a recording. The message she left was a work of art. It was a solid minute of pure, unadulterated fury. Miller, you snake, she shrieked, her voice distorted with rage. You think some forged deed you cooked up is going to scare me? I run this community. I will ruin you. I will sue you into oblivion. You are a pathetic, lonely little man, and I am going to crush you. This is my town. My town. It was a confession, a threat, and a perfect piece of evidence all rolled into one. I saved the audio file and forwarded it to Arthur. Brenda's next move was predictable. She tried to seize control of the narrative. She sent a mass email to the entire community. Dear residents, it began, it has come to my attention that a disgruntled homeowner, Mr. Jack Miller, is attempting to extort the community with fraudulent legal claims. He has fabricated some documents in a desperate attempt to bully the HOA after his inappropriate industrial workshop was denied. Please be assured, the board is handling this absurdity. We will not be intimidated by these pathetic scare tactics. Summit Creek is secure. Your property is secure. She was digging her grave deeper and deeper, shoveling the dirt with frantic energy. By publicly calling my deeds fraudulent, she had just committed libel. By assuring the residents their property was secure, she was setting them up for a catastrophic fall. The community, for the most part, believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was the authority they had known for years. I was the strange, quiet newcomer. I started getting dirty looks from neighbors. A couple of teenagers, probably put up to it by their parents, threw eggs at my garage door. The isolation was unpleasant, but it was necessary. For my plan to work, she needed to feel completely in control, completely supported by her loyal subjects. But behind the scenes, the rest of the board was panicking. They weren't all true believers like Brenda. They were mostly weak-willed people who had gone along with her for an easy life. A $14 million invoice and the threat of their entire community being cut off from the outside world was not an easy life. One of them, a man named George who was the board's treasurer, called me late one night, his voice a nervous whisper. Mr. Miller. Jack, is this for real? The deed to the road. It's 100% real, George, I said. You can verify it yourself on the county's public website. It's all there. Oh, God, he groaned. Brenda told us it was a fake. She said she had her lawyers looking at it and that it was a nuisance claim. Did she show you a report from her lawyers, George? I asked. Well, no. She just told us. George, I said, my voice patient. You're the treasurer. You know what a $14 million liability would do to the HOA's finances. You know what happens to property values when the property is legally landlocked. Brenda is lying to you. And she's exposing every single one of you to a massive lawsuit. The 72-hour clock is still ticking. I heard him swallow hard. What do you want? He asked. I want what's fair, I said. And I want Brenda to be held accountable for her actions. Starting with the illegal curb she built across my driveway. The call ended. I knew I had planted a seed of doubt. The unified front of the HOA was beginning to fracture. Brenda, however, felt the walls closing in and did what all cornered animals do, she lashed out, viciously. Her campaign against me went from petty harassment to something far darker. She was no longer trying to just win, she was trying to destroy me. She created a fake, Community Watch, Facebook page for Summit Creek. The posts were anonymous, but the voice was unmistakably hers. Concerns are growing about the reclusive man at the end of the cul-de-sac, one post read. He lives alone, has no family visit, and is now trying to extort his neighbors. What is he hiding? What kind of person tries to hold an entire community hostage? Parents, be vigilant, the insinuation was vile and unmistakable. She was trying to paint me as a predator. Then, she called my employer. I was a senior partner at a major civil engineering firm. My boss, a man I'd known for 20 years, called me into his office with a grim look on his face. Jack, I got a strange call this morning, he said. A woman named Brenda from your HOA. She said you were mentally unstable, a danger to the community, and were under investigation. She said our firm should be very concerned about the liability of employing you on major public works projects. I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but I pushed it down. And what did you tell her, Tom? He snorted. I told her I've known you for 2 decades and you're the most stable, methodical man I've ever met. Then I told her that if she ever called again with such slanderous accusations, our corporate legal team would sue her into the Stone Age. But Jack, what the hell is going on over there? I explained everything. He listened patiently, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief to, finally, a slow, impressed smile. Good God, Jack, he said. You own the whole mountain. Well, you handle it. Let me know if you need a character witness. The final straw, her most despicable act, was a call to Child Protective Services. She filed an anonymous report claiming that a single man living at my address was neglecting his young children. The absurdity of it was that I didn't have any children. Eleanor and I were never able to. The visit from the 2 social workers was brief and surreal. They saw I lived alone, realized the call was malicious, apologized for the intrusion, and left. But the act itself, the willingness to use a vital service for such a cruel and baseless attack, showed me the depths of her depravity. She wasn't just a bully anymore. She was a monster. And that's when the final piece of the puzzle fell into my lap. It came from the most unlikely of sources, Brenda's husband. His name was Frank. He was a quiet, unassuming accountant, a man who seemed to shrink in his wife's presence. I'd seen him a few times, mowing their lawn or getting the mail, always with a defeated slump to his shoulders. He contacted Arthur, my lawyer, through an anonymous email at first. He said he had information about Brenda's management of the HOA. Arthur arranged a discreet meeting at his office. Frank came in looking terrified, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest as if it were a life raft. She's out of control, he whispered, his hands shaking. This thing with you, it's pushed her over the edge. She's always been a bully, but this is different. She's unhinged. He opened the briefcase. Inside were neat stacks of papers, bank statements, invoices, and private ledgers. Frank, it turned out, was the HOA's unofficial bookkeeper. Brenda had him manage the accounts. She's been stealing, he said, his voice cracking. 4 years. Skimming money from the reserve funds. Inflating invoices for landscaping and pool maintenance and getting kickbacks from the contractors. The community has been paying for her vacations, her car, her designer clothes, it's all in here. He pointed to a specific invoice. It was from the construction company that had built the illegal curb across my driveway. The bill was for $10,000 for an emergency roadway repair. It had been paid out of the HOA's emergency reserve fund. She never got board approval for that, Frank said. She just ordered it done and had me cut the check. She's been using the HOA funds as her own personal war chest to fight you. This was it. The final, undeniable proof. This went beyond harassment and libel. This was felony embezzlement. This was fraud. This was the weapon that would not just defeat her, but utterly annihilate her. Arthur looked at Frank with a mixture of pity and respect. This takes a lot of courage, mister. Just call me Frank, he said. I can't live like this anymore. She's a monster. She has to be stopped. Armed with this new evidence, we moved up the chain. Arthur contacted the district attorney's office, bundling everything into one neat, damning package: the proof of my land ownership, the video of the vandalism, the recording of her threats, the screenshots of her libelous posts, and now, the irrefutable proof of years of financial crimes, all provided by a terrified but willing whistleblower. The DA's white-collar crime division was very, very interested. The 72-hour deadline on my letter had passed. I hadn't erected a barrier yet, that was just a threat to force the issue. But the time for letters and threats was over. It was time for the final showdown. The final act was set for the emergency HOA meeting. The board, now in a full-blown panic thanks to George's frantic phone calls and the DA's preliminary inquiries, had been forced to call it. The official agenda was to discuss the ongoing legal dispute with Mr. Jack Miller. Every homeowner in Summit Creek was there, packing the community clubhouse. The air was thick with tension, anger, and confusion. They still saw me as the villain, the man trying to destroy their peaceful lives. Brenda stood at the front of the room, at a podium, looking imperious and defiant. She clearly intended to use the meeting to rally her base, to paint me as the enemy and solidify her power. She had no idea that she wasn't the one running the show. She was the star of a tragedy, and the final curtain was about to fall. I arrived with Arthur a few minutes after the meeting started. We didn't sit with the residents. We stood at the back of the room. A few moments later, two men in sober suits entered and stood quietly by the door. They were investigators from the DA's office. Their presence sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Brenda launched into her opening remarks. It was a masterclass in gaslighting and victim blaming. "Friends. Neighbors," she began, her voice ringing with false sincerity. "Thank you for coming. We are facing a threat to our community. A threat from a man who seeks to enrich himself by destroying our way of life. Mr. Miller has come into our peaceful home and, through lies and deceit, is trying to hold us all hostage." She went on for 10 minutes, her voice rising in righteous indignation. She called me a liar, a fraud, an extortionist. She claimed my deeds were forgeries, that my claims were baseless. The crowd was eating it up. I could hear mutters of disgraceful and lock him up. I just stood there, my expression unreadable. Arthur put a calming hand on my arm. "Let her finish," he whispered. "She's just tightening the noose." When she finally paused for breath, her chest heaving, Arthur stepped forward. "Brenda, if I may," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily through the room. "This meeting is for homeowners only," she snapped. "You have no right to be here." "On the contrary," Arthur said smoothly, "my client, Mr. Miller, owns the land this clubhouse is built on, so I believe we have every right. But that's a matter for another day. For now, I'd like to correct a few factual inaccuracies in your speech." He walked to the front of the room and placed a folder on the podium. "You claim my client's deeds are fraudulent. Here is a certified letter from the county recorder's office, affirming that Mr. Miller is the sole, legal owner of parcel 73-4A, the road, and parcel 73-4B, the 2,400-acre mountain behind us. These are public records. You could have verified them yourself at any time." A nervous murmur went through the crowd. He wasn't finished. "You claim my client is an extortionist. Here is a video," he nodded to me. I took out a small tablet and connected it to the large television on the wall. I pressed play. The room was treated to a high-definition video of Brenda, her face contorted in a triumphant sneer, directing the construction crew as they poured a concrete barricade across my driveway. Her voice was crystal clear. "It's a traffic calming curb. If it happens to inconvenience those who don't respect our community's harmony, well, that's just an unfortunate side effect." The room fell silent. People were turning to look at each other, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion. "That," Arthur said, "is a video of the president of your HOA ordering and supervising an act of criminal vandalism, for which she billed you, the homeowners, $10,000. Brenda's face had gone pale. "That was a board-approved safety measure," she stammered. "Was it?" Arthur asked gently. He then played the audio file of her voicemail to me. Her enraged, shrieking voice filled the room. "I will ruin you. I am going to crush you. This is my town. My town." The silence in the room was now absolute, heavy, and stunned. The mask had been ripped away. The benevolent queen was revealed to be a raving tyrant. And finally, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a somber tone. "You have all paid your HOA dues faithfully, trusting they were being managed for the good of the community." He held up a thick sheaf of papers. "These are the HOA's financial records, provided by a whistleblower. They show that for the past 7 years, Brenda has embezzled over $200,000 of your money. It paid for her trips to Europe, her luxury car, and her legal fees to harass residents she didn't like. It's all here. Every fraudulent invoice, every illegal transfer." At the back of the room, Frank, her husband, stood up. He looked pale but resolute. "It's true," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "All of it. I have the records. I gave them to the district attorney." That's when she broke. The facade of control, of power, of righteousness, shattered into a million pieces. "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at her husband. "You weak, pathetic little man. You betrayed me." Then she turned her fury on the crowd. "He's lying. They're all lying. I did it for you. I did it all for this community. I protected your property values. I kept the riffraff out." Her eyes, wide and frantic, landed on me. This is his fault. The devil. He came here to destroy us. It was a full, public meltdown. In her panic, she was confessing to everything. I had to teach him a lesson, she screamed, gesturing wildly. The curb was necessary. And I deserved that money. I worked harder than any of you. I deserved it. The two investigators at the back of the room had heard enough. They began to walk slowly and deliberately toward the podium. The sight of them, of their calm, official approach, seemed to finally break through her hysteria. Her face crumpled, her skin turning a sickly, waxy color. The rage was replaced by pure, animal terror. No, she whispered. No, you can't. One of the investigators spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Brenda, you are under arrest for embezzlement, grand larceny, and wire fraud. He took her arm. You have the right to remain silent. That's when she uttered her last, impotent threat. As they cuffed her hands behind her back, she twisted her head and screamed at me, her face a mask of hate. You can't do this. I own you. I own this whole community. The click of the handcuffs was the only reply. They led her out of the clubhouse, a sobbing, shrieking mess. The community she had ruled for so long just watched, in stunned, horrified silence. The queen was deposed. The war was over. I had won. The aftermath was a slow, quiet rebuilding, much like the construction of a new bridge after an old one has failed. The community was in shock. The rest of the HOA board resigned en masse the next day, their letters filled with shame and apologies. A temporary committee was formed, led by George, the former treasurer, a man now determined to do things the right way. Their first official act was to send me a formal, written apology on behalf of the entire community. Their second was to hire a crew, at their own personal expense, not the HOA's, to jackhammer Brenda's traffic calming curb into dust. I stood in my driveway and watched them work, the sound of breaking concrete a deeply satisfying percussion. We began negotiations. I had no desire to be a landlord or to block access to dozens of families. That was never the point. My goal was justice, not cruelty. Arthur and I worked with the new board to draft a permanent land lease agreement for the road. It was a 99-year lease for the token sum of $1 a year. The contract had only two conditions. First, the HOA had to maintain the road at its own expense. Second, a new clause was to be added to the community bylaws, in perpetuity, stating that no homeowner could be fined or penalized for planting a memorial garden for a lost loved one. The community, humbled and liberated, eagerly agreed. The oppressive atmosphere that Brenda had cultivated for years began to dissipate. The endless rules about lawn height and mailbox color were quietly rolled back. People started talking to each other again, not as suspicious rule enforcers, but as neighbors. It turned out that the harmony Brenda was so obsessed with creating through tyranny was nothing compared to the real harmony that grew from simple, mutual respect. As for Brenda, her downfall was absolute. Faced with the mountain of evidence and her husband's testimony, she was convicted on multiple felony counts. The judge, citing her egregious abuse of power and complete lack of remorse, sentenced her to 8 years in state prison. Her assets were seized to pay back every penny she had stolen from the HOA, with the remainder going to me as a settlement for damages and defamation. Frank divorced her, sold their house with its flock of plastic flamingos, and moved away to start a new, quieter life. He was hailed as a hero. I used a portion of the settlement money to do two things. First, I established a small grant at the local community college in Eleanor's name, for students studying horticulture. Second, I rebuilt her garden. I used the same reclaimed railway sleepers, but this time I filled the bed with flowers from the mountain itself, seeds and saplings I carefully gathered from my own land. It was larger now, more vibrant, a riot of wild, untamed color. And in the center, I placed a new stone. I had spent days searching the slopes of Blackwood Mountain until I found the perfect one, a piece of granite with veins of quartz that glittered in the sun. It was solid. It was permanent. I never did build the workshop. I had only proposed it to set my trap. My peace and quiet was all I had ever wanted. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit by the garden as the sun sets behind the mountain, my mountain. I feel the quiet of the pines, the coolness of the air. The community behind me is calm, no longer buzzing with the static of Brenda's reign. They see me now not as an enemy, but as the quiet man who brought the rain that washed the whole place clean. I never sought to be a hero or a king. I was just a man pushed too far, a man who loved his wife and wanted a small patch of earth to remember her by. Brenda believed that power came from control, from enforcing rules and punishing dissent. She was wrong. Real power, I learned, comes from the truth. It comes from a dusty deed in a forgotten file. It comes from knowing the ground beneath your feet, and having the patience to wait for your opponent to build their entire world on a foundation of sand. She tried to bury my wife's memory under a pile of bylaws. Instead, I buried her empire under the weight of a mountain. And finally, there was peace.